and historic and devastating flood of the Mohawk River, a major part of the Erie Canal system in eastern upstate New York, occurred in late June 2006. While stories and reports of how it affected life and property are numerous, this video will also cover how a vital and busy railroad line was shut down for almost 2 days and was crippled for weeks beyond that. With rainfall for the month already above average, Monday, June 26th marked the beginning of a 3-day total exceeding 5 inches for a large region of the Mohawk River basin. This event was the result of a stalled weather pattern that funneled tropical moisture over New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. The many creeks and streams that feed the river were way past flood stage and dumping tremendous volumes of water into the river. By Tuesday, June 27th, a frontal boundary with a low-pressure system was centered over the Midwest, while a high-pressure system was centered over the southern coast of New Jersey. Both systems stalled over the region. The opposite rotations of these two systems worked together to channel tropical moisture northward, directly over central New York State. After leaving work on the afternoon of June 27th, I photographed a westbound train with a steady rain that had been falling much of the day becoming heavier. What follows is my photo and video documentation of the flood. An eastbound freight has stopped on track number 2. CSX, the company that owns the railroad, and well aware of the situation, was doing everything it could to get all trains from either direction on a long stretch of a busy double-track main line parked on the north track, which hopefully would be better protected from damage by the river. The train will soon proceed to a location about 2 miles east of here, where it will be able to cross over to the north track. But after clearing the spot, we'll have to back up in order to make room for another train approaching from the east. Major damage to track 2 at the milepost 201 automatic signal was already in its first stages. The village of Canajoharie and Lock 14, about 3¼ miles to the east, were quickly succumbing to the rising waters as well. Several boats were forced to moor quickly, with the occupants abandoning ship and getting to dry ground. The grounds of Riverfront Park have been completely submerged, and westbound traffic on Interstate Route 90 was stopped due to water overtaking a low portion of the highway. Canajoharie's iconic landmark and major business, the Beach Nut Company, was about to deal with damage that would lead to the historic facility closing and the company relocating. A sequence of photos shows the water rising and covering track number 2 completely. A high-priority intermodal train that was already west of the grade crossing of the Lock 14 access road is backed up. Once the power has cleared the crossing, the train is parked and the crew is safely picked up. Meanwhile, Main Street in Canajoharie is being flooded as the water level continues to rise. The rain had stopped several hours earlier, but the effect of tremendous amounts of water still being drained into the valley meant the highest water level was still some time away. Many businesses and homes in the village were going to suffer severe damage. One of the creeks that flow into the Mohawk River is the Canajoharie Creek. I took these photos as I returned home for the day. On the next day, I continued my documentation of the event. A parked westbound freight with Union Pacific power is encountered as I drove east on State Route 5, only to find it closed. Backtracking to Spring Street, the priority intermodal train from the previous day had not gone anywhere. I then headed to Fort Plain, where the heavy destruction of the flood was revealed. Track number 2 at the automatic signal at milepost 201 was washed out. The integrity of track number 1 was compromised, and the electrical relay box controlling the signal had been swept and toppled by the raging water. Staging of dump trucks loaded with stone and other equipment had already taken place, with the first priority being putting track number 1 back in service. On Friday, June 30th, I headed to Lock 13 and caught the slow-moving eastbound auto-rack train on track 1 while traveling east on Route 5, and a ballast train that was staged and ready to work on track 2 from a rest area along the New York Thruway. I was now armed with a video camera and was curious as to how the flood had affected Lock 13. The flood had done major damage to the area and transformed the grounds into a large pond. With water still raging past the debris-clogged gates of the lock, CSX crews were making repairs to the foundation of the track structure that was washed away. Although Track 1 had already been repaired enough to safely allow train traffic, Track 2 was going to take truckload after truckload of rock in order to build the foundation needed to support it. Almost an hour had passed since I photographed this eastbound auto-rack train about 7 miles west of here. With the automatic signaling system that controls the movement and safe separation of traffic out of service, all trains were under track warrant rules at a significantly reduced speed. The scene shows a section of track number 2 that was cut off with a welder's torch, and apparently will live on as part of the foundation structure for the replacement track. The lawns of much of the Lock 13 property had become part of the river, and with the flooding, nature was playing a cruel trick on a decent-sized carp. While the carp likely made its way back into the river as the water receded, the fate of many baby fish probably didn't turn out as well. The sanctuary of calm water covering the lawn would quickly become a death trap. This photo, taken on the next day, shows the area as nothing more than a small, shallow pond. Meanwhile, the effort continues to rebuild the supporting structure for the replacement track. At this time, sections of panel track are being placed in position at strategic locations. Every so often, the work is stopped while a train is allowed to pass the location on track number 1. At this time, with a long stretch of this busy railroad line reduced to a single track, trains are being fleeted, meaning that several trains heading in the same direction are allowed to move before trains from the opposite direction are allowed to. Returning west on Interstate 90 and then doubling back on State Route 5, the ballast train seen earlier is observed again. Another eastbound auto rack train is seen at milepost 191. With track warrant rules, a train must stop at every control point signal and get permission from the dispatcher to proceed to the next one. The train does not have to stop at the automatic signals, which do not control a crossover. Upon hearing the dispatcher talking to a detoured Norfolk Southern train, I set up at milepost 190. For as bad as the damage was to portions of the CSXT Mohawk subdivision, damages to the mostly single-track former Delaware and Hudson line in southern portions of New York State were much worse. Several bridges were washed out, and track was compromised in many other areas. In 2006, the line was owned by the Canadian Pacific, but the Norfolk Southern also had haulage rights. This is a Chicago to Albany train that also delivers trailers and containers to Air, Massachusetts. It has detoured to CSX rails at Buffalo. A final stop to end the day was at Lock 14, where the damage and debris of the flood to the chamber that raises and lowers the boats is revealed. Returning to Lock 13, it's observed that the water has receded back into the banks of the river, and that CSX has made at least temporary repairs and replaced track number 2. The amount of debris and damage to this lock and several others is massive. The gates on each lock had trapped many items made by man and nature, swept from normally dry ground by the flood. At milepost 200.7, a replacement electrical relay box is offloaded and placed alongside the tracks. It, along with a new Safe Trans style signal, will soon be located at the washed out area at milepost 201.4. A day later, a Montreal to Binghamton Canadian Pacific train is seen detouring over the CSX Mohawk subdivision. This train was diverted to Pan Am, then CSX tracks near Schenectady, and once reaching Syracuse, will run south on the New York Susquehanna and Western Railroad to Binghamton. Repairs to the signals at milepost 201.4 are almost complete. These signals were the beginning of the end for the classic New York Central signal bridges that once spanned a 4-track main line. In early 2013, the signal system on the entire line would be replaced. As a lesson learned from the flooding, CSX also put many of its trackside signal relay boxes on stilts. Montgomery County and 11 other counties in New York were declared federal disaster areas. The Erie Canal system was closed on June 28th from Lock 2 west to Lock 22. The Beach Nut Nutrition Corporation, an iconic landmark for Canajoharie for many years, suffered millions of dollars of damage and was forced to relocate about 17 miles to the east, which was called a 100-year flood because, in fact, the odds of the weather dynamics that created it were about 1%. The argument may exist that if the lock system on the Erie Canal was opened in advance of the onslaughts of water, that the river, although it would be raging and very dangerous, would have stayed more within its banks, as it flowed into the Hudson River near Albany. Because there was already recreational boat traffic on the canal, there was obviously a great concern for safety. Instead, the water rose well over flood stage at the locks, as tremendous amounts of debris clogged the gate system used to control the canal.